What if the person you let down the most, the one you failed beyond redemption, suddenly appeared right before your eyes? But not just anywhere, in the last place you'd ever expect. James Warden, a self-made billionaire, had spent years building an empire, believing he had everything: power, status, unimaginable wealth. But there was one thing missing, the one thing that truly mattered, and he had lost it long ago. That missing piece? His daughter. The child he had failed in ways he couldn't even begin to count. When fate brings her back into his life, living on the streets, abandoned and struggling, can he mend the wounds of a past he worked so hard to ignore? Can he undo the damage caused by years of neglect? Or will he realize that some wounds cut too deep to ever heal? This is a story of redemption, but the road to forgiveness? It's far more complicated than he ever imagined. The ghosts of the past. James Warden was no ordinary businessman. He had clawed his way to the top, turning a small startup into Warden Enterprises, a global powerhouse. He had money, influence, and a lifestyle most people only dreamed of. Yet, despite all that success, despite everything he had accomplished, a hollow emptiness gnawed at him every single day. For all his triumphs, there was one undeniable truth he couldn't escape. He had failed as a father. He had failed as a protector. He had failed as the one person his daughter should have been able to rely on the most. She had left home as a teenager, running away from his cold indifference, from the emotional neglect that had pushed her further and further away. And James? He had convinced himself she would come back eventually, that it was just rebellion, a phase. But the years passed, and she never returned. The memory of their last moments together still haunted him. Emily, standing in the doorway, tears streaking down her face, her voice shaking as she told him she was done. That she was tired of waiting for a father who never truly cared. He had scoffed at the time, believing she was just being dramatic. A teenager throwing a tantrum. He had been so sure she would come to her senses. But she hadn't. And as the years rolled on, the distance between them grew into a chasm so deep, so wide, that he no longer knew if there was a way to bridge it. Now, the mansion he called home felt nothing like home at all. The lavishly decorated halls, the perfectly arranged furniture, the breathtaking view of the city skyline. None of it mattered. None of it meant a thing without Emily. He had spent years trying to drown the guilt in work, in fleeting relationships, in the endless pursuit of success. But no amount of money, no achievement, no deal signed in a boardroom could fill the void her absence had left behind. An encounter that changed everything. It was supposed to be just another night. Another high-profile gala, another event in his honor. His company had just finalized the acquisition of a major tech firm, expanding his empire even further. The room had been filled with applause, his name whispered in admiration. He had stood on that stage, shaking hands, smiling for the cameras, playing the role of the powerful, untouchable billionaire. But even as he basked in the glory of yet another success, his mind refused to stay in the present. His thoughts kept circling back to Emily. Where was she? Was she okay? Did she even think about him anymore? As he slid into the back seat of his limousine, he let out a tired sigh, staring out at the glowing city lights. This was his kingdom, a city he had conquered, and yet, he had never felt more lost. Then, amidst the blur of people moving along the sidewalk, he saw her. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things. A trick of the light. A mirage created by his own guilt. But no, it was real. Standing under the dim glow of a street lamp, lost in the crowd, was Emily, his daughter. But she was nothing like the girl he remembered. The well-groomed, bright-eyed teenager who had once lived under his roof was gone. In her place stood a woman who had been through hell. Her clothes were tattered, her hair tangled, her face shadowed with exhaustion and hardship. His heart pounded against his ribs. She had been living on the streets, and he had no idea. "Stop the car," he ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. The limo screeched to a halt, and before he could even think, he stepped out, his feet moving on instinct. He had spent years searching for answers, drowning in regret, but now that she was right there in front of him, He had no idea what to say. "Emily," he called out, his voice hoarse, thick with emotion. She turned slowly. Their eyes met. For a split second, recognition flickered in her gaze. And then something else took its place. Something colder. Something sharper. Resentment. "Dad," she said, her voice like ice. "What are you doing here?" James swallowed, his throat dry. I've been looking for you. You what?" She cut him off, her words laced with anger. "Looking for me? When? Where were you when I needed you, huh? When I had nothing. When I had nowhere to go." Her voice trembled, but there was steel behind it. "You never looked for me when it actually mattered." The words hit him like a blade to the chest. He had no defense. No excuse. Just the weight of years he could never take back. "I know," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't there. I failed you. I failed you in every way that matters." His jaw tightened. "But I'm here now. Please, Emily, just let me talk." She studied him, her face unreadable. For a long, painful moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she spoke. "Talk then," she said flatly. "But don't think for a second that I'll forgive you. You lost that privilege a long time ago." She turned to walk away. Panic surged through him. He couldn't let her go. Not again. Not this time. "Emily, wait." His voice cracked as he took a step forward. "Please, don't walk away from me again." His hands clenched into fists. He knew it was too late. He knew he had no right to ask for anything. But if there was even the slightest chance, no matter how small, that he could make things right, he wasn't going to let it slip through his fingers. Not this time. For a split second, Emily froze. She didn't move, didn't turn around, but James saw it. The way her shoulders tensed, the way her breath hitched ever so slightly. For the first time, he saw it, beneath all the anger, the bitterness, the walls she had built around herself. There was still a part of her that was vulnerable, a part that, deep down, might still care. But she didn't turn to face him. "Then prove it," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Prove that you actually care." And just like that, she was gone again. The journey of redemption begins. The days that followed were filled with a kind of desperation James had never known before. He had spent a lifetime chasing deals, building companies, sealing billion-dollar contracts, but none of it compared to the weight of what he had just lost. Or what he was about to lose forever. He couldn't stop thinking about that night. The way Emily had looked at him, with something far worse than hatred. Indifference. She had been living a life so far removed from his own that he couldn't even begin to understand it. He had no idea what she had been through, how much she had suffered. But he knew one thing for certain. He had to try. For the first time in his life, money wasn't the solution. Wealth couldn't buy forgiveness, and it sure as hell couldn't erase the years of pain he had caused. No amount of financial support would fix what was broken between them. But what he could give her was something far more valuable. Time. Attention. Sincerity. And he was ready to give all three. Searching for Emily. Determined, James began searching. He revisited the streets where he had first seen her, asking questions, looking for any sign of her whereabouts. He spoke to people in the shelters, the ones who had seen the reality of the world he had ignored for so long. And with every conversation, he learned more about the life his daughter had lived. The hunger, the cold, the constant fear of never knowing what tomorrow would bring. Each story felt like a dagger to his chest. Then one night, after weeks of searching, he found her. The shelter was nothing like the pristine, polished world James was used to. A rundown building tucked away in the forgotten corners of the city, it was the last refuge for those who had nowhere else to go. The sign above the entrance was barely hanging on, the paint chipped and peeling. Inside, the air carried the scent of damp fabric and exhaustion. People huddled together, wrapped in thin blankets, resting on worn-out mattresses. It was a stark contrast to the luxury James had surrounded himself with his entire life. But what caught his attention wasn't the bleakness of the place, it was the sense of resilience in the air. These people had lost everything, yet they still held on. They still fought. And then he saw her. She was sitting in the far corner of the room, hunched over, her face hidden beneath the hood of an oversized sweatshirt. But he knew. He didn't need to see her face to recognize his own daughter. His heart pounded as he slowly approached, unsure if she would run again. Unsure if she would even want to see him. "Emily," he said gently, his voice barely steady. "It's me, your dad." She didn't look up right away. For a moment, he thought she might ignore him entirely. But then, in a voice so tired, so distant, she finally spoke. "You're still here?" James nodded. "I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." He swallowed hard, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I want to help. I want to make things right." She let out a hollow laugh, finally raising her head. Her eyes, once filled with the fire of youth, now carried the weight of someone who had seen too much, suffered too much. "You can't fix this, Dad," she whispered. "You can't fix me." His chest tightened, but he shook his head. "I'm not here to fix anything, Emily." He exhaled. I just want to listen." And so, for the first time, he did. She spoke, haltingly at first, then more freely, about her years on the streets, the nights spent cold and afraid, the moments when she had lost all hope. She told him how she had felt abandoned, like she had never truly mattered. How, for years, she had waited for him to come after her. And when he hadn't, she had forced herself to stop caring. Every word was a knife to his heart. He had been so blind, so wrapped up in his own world that he had never truly seen the damage he had done. But as they talked, something shifted. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. But for the first time, she let him in, building a future together. James didn't stop coming back. He kept showing up, not as a billionaire trying to throw money at the problem, but as a father trying to earn back his daughter's trust. He started volunteering at the shelter, working alongside her, helping where he could. And in doing so, he saw firsthand just how much these people struggled. How underfunded everything was. How many people had fallen through the cracks of a society that had simply stopped caring. And then an idea took root. Not as a way to win Emily's forgiveness, but as something real. Something meaningful. Together, they created a plan to build something better. A shelter that didn't just provide a roof over people's heads, but gave them a way forward. Job training, mental health support, resources that could help them rebuild their lives. Emily, driven by her own experiences, took charge of the programs. James used his influence to secure funding, to bring attention to their cause. It wasn't easy. It took months of relentless work, sleepless nights, endless planning. But finally, the day came. The grand opening of Emily's Haven. The sign above the new building read Emily's Haven. It was a simple ceremony, no flashy event, no media spectacle. Just a gathering of people who believed in what they had built. As Emily stood beside James, looking out at the people who would finally have a safe place to turn to, her expression was a mixture of disbelief and quiet pride. "I never thought this would be possible," she admitted, her voice raw with emotion. James turned to her, his eyes filled with something he hadn't felt in years, true purpose. "We did it," he said softly. "Together." She looked at him then, really looked at him. And for the first time in years, he saw something in her eyes that he thought had been lost forever. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new. The true measure of success. Emily's Haven became more than just a shelter. It became a place of hope, a place of second chances, a place where people who had been forgotten could finally be seen. And in the process, James found something he had never expected. For years, he had measured success by the numbers in his bank account, the size of his empire. But standing beside his daughter, watching her change lives, watching her lead with passion and strength, he finally understood. Success had never been about power. It had never been about wealth. It had always been about the people he helped, the lives he touched, the relationships he rebuilt. And as he looked at Emily, standing strong beside him, he realized this was the greatest achievement of his life. This was the legacy that truly mattered.